40 years, she has been a tireless advocate on behalf of more than 20,000 Tibetan refugee children throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Jetsun Pema.
Jetsun Pema.
Amala, thanks. Thanks. No. Bye. Thanks. Kanye tebe kanti taya nganzu pen top cheku twa karasi nganzu pudu kimde mingyu di wa mima ki awazo shepchu shuya ki lengen di gaurum chige nganzu di sura nambri di kanti kedu ni majib chen di la lench tang ku twa jesanga ta pamazu pugu de tang tu mena pugu di je pame zal yuna pame ne tang kende chres pame ne tang de shi sha chen en nganzu this ya konzo ya tsunu rab chite kugyune ri karchi kugyune inde china tu bi na en nganzu kayu la yu pento ba.
The main work of TCV is how do you bring up Tibetan children in exile, being Tibetans, you know. I think the Tibetan diaspora, they always keep in their mind that there are Tibetans who are left behind in Tibet going through a difficult situation, and that those of us who enjoy freedom in exile, it's the duty of the people in exile to keep the identity alive. Well, I was, born the next year after His Holiness arrived in Lhasa, and he was already installed in the Potala. And of course, for me, growing up in Lhasa was quite an experience because my parents, they came from a tiny little village in the northeast of Tibet. I was the first child to be born after His Holiness was recognized in our family. So when I was born, my mother, she told me that she went to His Holiness and asked for a name, and His Holiness named me Jetsun Pema, and that was the first name that His Holiness gave. At that time, His Holiness was just almost 6 years old. The Lama who names you usually gives the first part of his name.
Jetsun Pema, 점점 따라나 리드 안도 심차 타가네. 졸라자로 돈로 가르카레스 세 발라다 암라 깨당도 샤자 통가쇼스 어디 대르상가 챙도 그렇게 바보를 붙이 가르소를 대체 되들로 시래.
When I see my mother busy in the kitchen baking bread, because I knew then she was making some special bread and dishes to take up to His Holiness, to the Potala. And then I used to always tell her, will you please take us, will you take us? So sometimes she used to take us, and then that was a great joy for us, because we would visit His Holiness up in the Potala. As we climbed up the last step and got into the dark rooms of the Potala, then we had to really be very quiet and, refrain from making sounds and all that. So then we knew we were nearing His Holiness's residence. And then once we got inside there, we had to be very quiet and sit behind my mother. And then my mother and His Holiness would be talking. But then one of the attendants who always looked after His Holiness's, food and his clothing and all, he would always make a sign to us and tell us to come outside. And then we would go out, and then he'll fill up our pockets with lots of sweets and all goodies. So whenever we went up there, we would always try to look, where is that old man with the beard? As a child of 9 years old, being told you're going to be going to school. And then, of course, I didn't come alone. I came with my nephew, who was just a few months younger than me. Then my niece, who was 2 years younger than me. And so the three of us, we were brought to India by my sister.
We met around about 1952, and we were in school at that time. Jetsun Pema came as a very young girl from Tibet, and her brother, Mr. Gyalathondup, was staying in Darjeeling, and so he put her into the school in Loreto.
And Jetsun Pema Tagal Amala Jawa Harsur Amala Hasa Shuyorba, Jetsun Pema Darjeeling Shuyore, Ngadanimdo Timato, Jawas Kenangi Omare, Jawata Tawadi Nechigore, Netawadi Pe Karsur, Sawan Tolmato, Ungus, Jawachigis, Sukan Lagu Omare.
And then, we didn't know any English, so we were taught, from, like I was already 9 years old, and then I had to sit with like 5-year-olds and 6 years old, and that was a little bit embarrassing, but anyway, because I didn't know the language, so we had to start that way.
To me, it's still like almost very recent, in my mind it just stands out. Now I'm so old. We are so old. Mrs. Pamela and myself. When I went there, I met, of course, Pema. We called Pamela Pema. We never used the honorific La. And we all got to be real good friends.
And Pema had always the ability to laugh. She was very good. She had a sense of humor, but she was always a very simple person and a very sober person, because when we went out for picnics, when we did naughty things, Pema would always say, you can't do like that, she will stop us.
The hockey kepa tuye, and the cup they are hockey cesati Saint Joseph ki laptachore. The tang di kande semuchitizane Saint Joseph na ya pepu kashe chore nga tuch meto. Ani konse ganso chele strike bi kain cheni Jetsun Pema hockey defense na yore kandula goalkeeper che nge pinga defense chenga forward chenga samlo gyak pa tikte de yore ani konse chele gep cheta takta ri gemika ga ngazu pomte zut ge tan shan shan takta ri se konse chele ge bi.
One day, Mother Superior walked into the study hall and she asked Pema to come out. And she told her that her family was on the flight from Tibet, and nobody knew where they were.
In school, in the papers they would say the Dalai Lama is missing and all, and the nuns, they used to pray in the school for His Holiness's, welfare, and they would pray that he's safe and everything. And then, of course, in March we heard that His Holiness had crossed into into India and crossed the border. All that took place when I was in school. After completing my school, my brother said, it's better, you can serve better if you had some more education. So I was sent to Switzerland to study French and to have some education over there. And then His Holiness saw these children. Then he called my sister and he said, now you have to look after these children. Then that's how Tibetan Children's Village was started. At that time when we first started, it was called the Nursery for Tibetan Children. Then there were more and more children recruited, from the road construction camps, and they were brought here. And in those days, early 60s and all, most of the children who came were either orphans or semi-orphans.
Roll number 1. This is a disability. Tawani to get and the jela tang a lobjong answer disability in the jungi badu disability and that Tandabado and Losum Jo. Thank you, disability. Angzi and Losum Jo the contest to make Kuna Maskanazana Lega Koran like English, passion you did, and it is a woman.
In 1964, in May, I sort of took over and started to do what my sister started in 1960. And then my sister went for medical treatment to Calcutta, and later in Calcutta they discovered she had cancer, so she went to England, but it was too late, and then in November 1964 she passed away.
After she passed away, we were all very sad because it was like losing a great mother that all these children had in the village. But on the positive side, we had Amala still carrying on her work, and eventually Amala became the principal of the Tibetan Children's Village. And at that time, if I remember right, I think there was maybe the very first Tibetan homes concept of having a home, special home built for children of say about 20 to 25 children and with their foster parents, so that this provides a situation where it's like a family and children are taken care of these foster parents and looked after to make sure that they are well cared for.
cho kazakane kane yoba bugu jeju da buguni kaze jebine da shitu ya mindu jeje chunu sungdang mare.
In those early days, it was not easy. In 64, 65, a group of children from Nepal, they came. There were 150 children or something. And then they all had diarrhea, these children. They were so sick. And we had our Swiss Red Cross doctors. They were taking care of them. And then in one night, like 4 children just died because there wasn't enough medical help for them. They were coming from Nepal, walking for a few days, then getting maybe last stretch of the road, then they would come by bus. These children, their parents were not there, so who were we to inform? And then, like, children would die nearly every 2-3 days. Children would die because there wasn't enough facilities to take good care of them. And then what hit them is the hard journey.
And in 1969, I finally got to go to TCV. By that time, things had improved a lot, but were still in much need of, work. And so I stayed for 6 months and tried to help as much as I could as a volunteer. And then went back to Germany, and then I started fundraising for, house construction, a German home construction, and finding sponsors. So I did that together with German Aid to Tibetans.
She was able to call me to Dharamsala, and I started working with Kongu Tarala. I enjoyed my work over there, and at the same time I was able to teach little bit Ganyuchimu English, She found it very funny. She was always laughing and smiling and very dignified. I think the first thing about Ganyuchimu that I think is that she was a very dignified person. I think Pema has got the same thing from her mother, from that same ability to be a presence in front of people, and the presence comes from a strength within oneself, a feeling of knowing oneself and being oneself. I think that strength she has, and I think she reflects that from her mother. Her mother had it.
Any renegade into the Kachambo, the Miri Rishunta Jabba Tame Dral and Gayudu, any means you can't eat a Kachambo Jella, Undu Nambre, and Jigdon could do Jutambe and Antwa, and the Dutch MG Penye Dang, Taranashi, Jigdunke, Doson Tayata, Kanjitone, Kungarabo Kalkantam, Tene, and then Hajim Shuliata, Hajim Shul de Sijona Rona, Sijona Rona, Chije Shune. 아니 셰셰나 아니 진종대 차장 수대 맞춤분에 진종대 전들이야 두두 지마당하세 아니 다 벤조로 얼음치야다 진종설 벤조 탑시치야 민바 탑시치야 텐데기디게디 퉁게 나네 단대민지가 열심히 사제 수부시나 멘가 자메주칸다 메수카 사자체 디네 다 콜레지 투야데 네 멜로간질에 직 축되어데 사지지에 대요 말은 미게 단도 콜리지 축되버데 사버티게 되데 샤잔 껴나 제데 사잔 껴 이네민지 간게 멤버 칼칸점 파주 탑시나 안디게 트디 사마 차네 아니 랑자 파리야 Tapene Tinjon, the Sikjon, Naro Nalse, and the Putum Kimdelia, Tata Chitin Jochade, Rob Drake, the Zenchi Indus, and Day Shaposum Duce, and Pa, Tina, the Chumbudo.
Gonglo samden la ge ta jizun pam la chance gebri ani sudin de mari chance gebri ta mi awch gores chechen ni gejer chu ani kechi shu di mi sangbo chi da mi yerab chi gores ta sudos antine tanda gyana changi ludu gebla ta yawch da dus kuran tanda amala di santu changre kunzo santu chang kuna zo pyonalia ta chongba chi shu de 제산 쿠란 인제 켄 힌디 켄 안데네 은지도 야고여자 쿠란 선상게 총제도 바기 콘소 로퍼슈제 챌린지도 와 아니 디디 이제네 공로 섬달랑이 니게 다 다람살라 직 페이스 지즈밤라 쿠란 워킹이 요레 이네 코급데 다직 야 페이스 제제 아니 ng니게 모트 슈 엔두스 제제 쿠란이 두스 찬스게 엔 아와 숨춤브바
Chairman Mao was dead, and Deng began to reverse his policies. He invited the Dalai Lama to send fact-finding delegations to Tibet. The rumors that the Dalai Lama's representatives had returned brought out thousands, desperate for any news of their exiled leader. The delegations, which included the Dalai Lama's own sister, were shattered.
The third delegation was the delegation that I went with. I was the leader of that third delegation. And we were mostly teachers and people involved with education. We were called the education delegation. Then as we went deeper and deeper into, Tibetan territory, then we realized how bad things were in Tibet. There were no schools, the children hardly went to school. We would visit a village, they say, oh, the school is there. There would be a nice tent put up, and then there'll be like 10 or 20 children sitting there, and then there's supposed to be a teacher. And then there's a person teaching them something, Chinese. And then, you walk up to the children, you hold their hands, and their hands are all rough, working in the fields. They weren't going to school. So, and then the school tent had a carpet. I just lifted the carpet up, and then the grass under that carpet was all green. So it was just a sham putting up these schools. Things that we heard from the people were how much they suffered, how many people they lost. Every family, there was not one family who did not lose, father or a son, because they were taken to the concentration camps, and it was really terrible. And then they would cry, and we would cry, and then it always ended up that we were always shedding tears. We spent 105 days in Tibet, over 3 months, And then during all that time, I think I've shed buckets and buckets of tears. It was just a terrible experience.
아니 바가 자밀레시나 카리카도 당한저 먼저 미투네 자미기 게도 디킹게디 잠구주랑레 아니 건조기 담마데시도 아디 마르타스네 카리카도 바딘데슈 아니 뭐네 당네 탐 명라다 자와르 뭐징고스 자와타우치 당가랑기 다 통조디딘데 중을
After the first delegation, that was in end of 1979, then the first batch of children came from Tibet. Then 1980, 81, 82, they continued to come. Those were the children who had parents in Tibet but was smuggled across the border and brought to TCV, who had no education in Tibet, whose parents were, took great trouble to pay somebody to bring the children across. That did wonders for our children here, because that bonding between the children from Tibet, the new arrivals, and the children who were born in India and who took everything for granted, it was an eye-opener for them to realize how precious education is.
That day, 아부 잡고서 잡았당데 언제 계속 등주 정말인 거. 뜻을 보고 계속 등주 정말인 거를 계속 뮤지션을 마술이는 거.
At one time, as many as 1,000 children coming in 1 year from Tibet.
변에 보고 망보 연구위에서 또 보고 참말로 될 샤도가 말아. 샤도가 매다 아니 디시비기 따니 라브레션 받은도 갈리갈리 코페라 베네 로티시 코페레 단데 다 로티시기 제라 코바르부 수자 디시빌라다 디시 벨고비 된소래 따든도 망보 보고 망보 망다니래 망다 자가나 여기 보고체 변에 용에 보고 니체 디갑라 뭐디 이네도 보고 망다니 아니 디시비 갈리갈리 아니 branch 망고 써야 돼. 근데 직 대ingresan 거든 나라라.
지로 직동급계 계주 캡시 안 앞에네 두 튜엔시네 딱 랑가라 가지고 고려면데 슈슈 계시에메데 이마이네 부두김된 랍다 디발라이 하고도 땅아 대계셔더라. 부두김된을 사회슈구라 람상 고랄랍다 줘라서 아주 갑스. 다디 차상 두다 디갑스. 아니 나랑 당보 주두잠바다 개 구이시면서 땡 얘기를 랍다 문도라는 거 로준 시에게 고갑라스 안 디네 지네다 로중이 링갈라 로 아니 벽임 랑라 로중치 나라이다 나라다 TCV 대화대페 마세다 소수기 파마다 부나시 대화 빼 첨보 아니 가레이 바이네 델라 딩이 베투도 델라 용이 베투도 니용이 투도.
The Chinese realized that I think it backfired on them. In the, they sent out, let the children go, send as many as possible, because they thought it was going to be a burden on the Tibetans in exile, on the Tibetan government, that we wouldn't be able to take care of them, But then when we were able to take care of all these children, and then many of them, when they returned back, they had trouble in Tibet.
The main thing that in her life was her strong commitment to the Tibetan cause and her belief in that Tibetan cause. The central focus of her life is that. She was running the TCV and she was sending her children. Her children all went to TCV to study there. With the orphans, with the people, with everybody, they were studying in the same way, and that said something about her character.
Amala namgyuki chitangi susu ama samyata bunde yomare nal pitu samba kalasu tikche che titu amala la kugap koro chunyomare chale ki bet putukim digi chale nanglo la timche jeni temajingan so kuntu jega chikaps de kuntu ne kanjinamre kya ama kala kande suyos kanas an nge oma tensi chotaki amla suji shene sure so kajin amla suji jarota sudanda duzu changma kembache ine 탑산항로 뒤주체 땅에 주나요 말봐 잘했다 디게 시셰베 슈젠 민지 간사지
로고 침비어리 지금 로고 침비어리 그런 군도 돈 계산양조 돈 지두전에 그런게 투범다 용디 용 용그르바 이네 그런게 잘해디 균에 투쇼메비지 나브리.
Her husband died, so she was widowed with 3 children. They were about 10, 11, 12, in that, young teenagers. But it was very tragic, of course, for her.
When she lost her daughter, I spoke to her, but I could sense the pain that she has. But I think she has a certain spirituality that goes deeper than that, and she did not start saying. She did not break down or say anything. She was very strong. And I think it's that spirituality that she has and that strength that she has in her character that made her bear that loss. I don't think it was easy for her. I spoke to her at that time, and I certainly don't think it was easy for her. But she did not show anything. She did not show, you could feel that she had the pain, but that was it.
진주간라 살론 주도 가두이네 셈베낭로라 만주 암라레 이네 암라디 아니 부족임디 부두두 동자망고게 암라 직바 제거레스 부족임디 부조 파마두두 삼바 파마메네 안 베네추 파마빙가 샤제네 용년도 수인두 삼바 혼주 상매게 아니 암라 중고레스 안 부주게 창매 암라 슈 당한주 점점 암라레 첩르제제네 암라 운에 수 암라이 뱅한주 암라이베 부족임데 암라이베스 dus 제무다다니 슈고레이네 나란주기 디카레 암라기 담제디 안 겨름친기 dus 파 찰레 겐 남바디 an bet huta pata an gyapta dumeba an khattuine tsuktu an pegi chaleti thangbusa jeni ani nanghe chire
pyugim lapte nanglola ta pu rikpa yakpo dana shingi jumbo dana shingi lobjong batkora chi yin singe de ta pe masi mangboyore dinjegi ta pu dizo jignya mo matewa che khozo yang kare thungi logashi खुजुगी रिगबले पेवे खुजुगी जोंदाले पेवे खुजुगी चिदाले पेवे चिथुबाइना अनि याबो दु अनि दिजे गोंचिनि अनि सेलिकुल लाबेदि अनि दुक्चिनि खालाउरेदा मजु सावसुगु जिरेस
당은주 랍자데 토마 운주 슈에디 다 니동시 총가 뒤쟁임도 독시에 운주 나무래 디네 제제 탄다 파도 당은주로 주루로요래 로주주 낭로래 탄다 아리라 차샤네레 다때 로벤데 요와 롭중오데 나해기 어딘데 로벤 망부 슈증어 줄롭두기 근데 라데기 디 라바참 매베 쿠란주 롭중 무투니 제제제 소워체리 제제 딘데 리치 강제 돈에 페나차샤바나 MIT 레디타 아리노 롭중 laptop 젤롭다 유나메나지레 디레 에무리레 Duke, and Tando Dimeva Stanford, Dunzunalo Lepa, look to turn, Tando Mutu, Kashet, Tomatsam Mevegi, Gala in Bena, Amjiki, Samidi, Korantulobian Konzura, Sudungi, engineer Korantura, and Tanda Yumatsam Mevegi, Tanda Pushungi Naloleta, Tanda Shiri Legure, Tanda Dele Mengare, Dunzunalo, Chale Nangshibai.
Pu Madam Madala, Rixe Madam Madari, Pu Madam Madala, Susu, Tibet Madam Madari, Pu Madam Madala, Ing Madam Madism, Pu Kashire, Dindi Rixela pay Ing Duata. Songs Dizo, the Kachimbo Shuish in the Zamba, and Duxinita, Pugim Nalakare, VDCD, and Kachimbo Peresha, and D. Duxinigo to Dus, the Nelly, Takalongazu Tambu, Nelanganzukare, Lashek and the Pugim Rana Chusha. The Wataran Langs love the water, and Dine, the diletis, think do that the Devoyo. 딘데신 딱할로레 락시에 잉유그 랑기체도 아니 먼저 위치도 고수유시레샤
군두 꼼체레 군두 카두이네 베 지다 베미마 토리아다 베 투구 슈시요레 까무카레이네 베던 토리아 까메나베 미신 게르케 능미타다 치 저거 토모사 드리카베 케케 요마르바 제상 군두 공바틴데 진두 전에 지슨 패밀라 원에 다게 다 뉴버스고레 다게 디 카스레타 람데르 치추나 체체 딘데스 체체 원에 집에 돌려 슈치기 투나 요레
I still remember, in 1972, we opened one of the homes, home number 2. His Holiness came to inaugurate that home. His Holiness was saying that the children are being educated. We are, thanks to the help of the government of India, the boarding schools are going on well. Children are getting their education. But then he said that, now maybe it's time to think of educating our children through the medium of Tibetan language. But then, we were with all the number of children coming and then with all the facilities that we had to get ready for the children, it was not possible. In the beginning, when we introduced medium of Tibetan language and the textbooks in Tibetan language, many of our, teachers, they didn't like it. The first year went, the second year went. Then from the third year, they realized teaching your children in your own mother tongue, the children were understanding what they were learning. Then the teachers realized that this is a good method. Child Education Declaration. India was one of the signatories, and in that declaration it says every child must be educated in its mother tongue till primary school level. This is something, the message that must be instilled in the minds of course, the people who are, the principals and the headmasters, but at the same time, it must go down, filter down to your teachers. and through the teachers, it has to be implemented on the children.
다 다자 다른 안들 지가 부수관 공네 디디 라린 개시 용기야라 다시 다시 다 가서 소사이티 공부 라브다 용조라야 다 그냥 진짜 가라 강사지 보도 배가 나라야 차상 러비야기 다도甚至于这个的现在가서 그게 맞아 뽑아기에 버시래라 야우시고 중사 다 간다 괜히 사대 야래 디중나 배배게 야제도 배배게 야제 신배이나 배배리 좀 팽게 야래 배배 남바스냐래 디 팽게 야래 신 배배게 야제 땅 뭐소나 사게 통계가 소실이니 배게 개발마도 단다 강세 유튜브이나 게이 신다지 배주시나 마도 배배게 이게 만당 사윤데 어떤 뭐에 사보시라래라 배배게 투소줘야 돼 디터는 정식 투소 두브리.
Each time there was a general public kind of a meeting, you know, they always said, oh my, all these young people, they get an education in our schools, they learn Tibetan up to the, you know, high school level, then they go to college, they go to all the colleges scattered all over India, different colleges, and when they come back within the Tibetan community, many of them, you know, they can't even speak Tibetan properly. They've forgotten the Tibetan language that we taught them in the schools for 10, 12 years. So they said, what's happening? Then we had to find out what was wrong, you know. And then we found out that many of them were not getting admission in the really good Indian colleges. Mostly they were in the mediocre Indian colleges. And some of them, even I found out that they were in colleges where the medium of instruction was supposed to be in English, but the lecturer would come and give the lecture either in Hindi or in Kannada or in Malayalam or all these different languages, and that's where they went. And then, of course, while they were in college for 4 years, there were many of them who couldn't afford to go to visit their parents. They were out of touch with the Tibetans. We started raising funds for the college, and then the college is now functioning. They get you know, credit for learning Buddhist philosophy. They get credit for learning Tibetan language, and the Bangalore University has now recognized Tibetan language up to PhD level.
She always said, I'm not the person to stay single, you know, or be a nun, which apparently in the old days you had to become a nun. But that's true here too, in the West that was here also. And she did not want to do that. Yeah, it was very nice that she was able to find a nice husband again, just being good to each other.
Legend Mangbo Mona collect Gabriel Amala Gide Amla Simsuta Amla Better that you tangle Gaboche, Zeboche, Shenaiche, Tamayara.
Well, Amala, because you know, we've got so many Amalas, all the house mothers are Amalas. And now, anyway, the Amala doesn't stay any longer. I'm now Mola, that means grandmother. We've been refugees for now, you know, 60 years. Now we always cannot be living on other people's help. So we also have to learn to stand up on our own feet, especially from our own community.
Ama Jetsun Pema, Ama Kingi Samdere.
I'm going to be 80 this year. People ask His Holiness, being born as a human being, what is it that I should do? His Holiness also says, every human being seeks happiness. But at the same time, if you have this, human life, it's important that you think about others and make your life a purposeful life.
다 중무 지지배마 다로 제주 겨로 제주리기 그래 제에네 아드보도 제때 가에네 부스강 더주 조르 뒤에 아니 표주디에 제때 내만 고든 아자라 담바되기 가서 kursi 되네니 배매디 슈그루 제체 아니 로몽구직을 아니 후다 제체 도스리 엔터리다 로제슈 레제 진리인데 아니 자다부터 후다 제디 투시스야다 아니 더동 그게 더 정도 써야지 내 말은 저기에 Sangye tinke shinkama toware sho chui kamanama daru midangashi Sangye karapu shingama toware sho mei kamanama daru midangashi Sangye marapu shinkama toware sho lungi kamanama daru midangashi Sangye janku shinkama toware sho da seresum daru midangashi shido ramajama shinkama toware sho Jetsun kamanama daru midangashi Sangye natsu shinkama toware sho Danama tamache rang dara she